Hello, this is Karen Troy, and I am going to show you right now how to set up the force plates in the biomechanics lab. So this is a little bit of troubleshooting, but also just the basic setup. Okay, so here is what the force plates look like. They have an attachment section here, so you're going to use this this port right here, and then each of the two force plates that we have also has a serial number with a calibration file associated with it. And I don't know if you can see in here, so in this case the serial number is 0891, and so when we install this force plate we need to make sure that we include the calibration file that goes with force plate 0891. Now the plates, so what happens here is you've also got this little box right here, and each force plate has a box that looks like this. So you can either hook up a single force plate to the computer, in which case you always put it into plate A, or you can hook up both force plates to the same computer, in which case you have A and B. And the thing you have to check is that this little switch here needs to be flipped to A if you've got one plate, or A plus B if you've got to two plates. Okay? So what happens basically is that this cord here is going to attach to this whole mess of wires, and here's the other end of it. So I'm going to plug that in just like that. Okay. Also in the box there's a power supply right here. Okay, so that power supply just gets plugged into here. Okay, and then the third thing is that this cable right here attaches eventually to this USB, and so that needs to go into the back of the computer. Let's find a spot like right there. Okay, so next thing to check is that our force plates are actually on. So one thing about this power supply, so I don't know if you can see, but when it's a little picky. Sometimes the light goes off. Okay, so you need to check and make sure that the light is actually on. Sometimes this power supply needs to be jiggled a little bit. So that's the first thing to check if you find for some reason your force plate isn't working. Okay, so next thing is we go over and look at the computer. Okay, so on the computer screen, AMTI Net Force is the name of the program that we're going to use, and it's going to give us, let's see if I can do this here. Okay, so it basically gives us a handful of different options. The first thing that we want to do is go to Setup and go to Hardware Installation. Okay, now what it shows us here is that force plate 0891 has already been installed. Okay, and you see there's a couple things. So this software is really set up to do clinical data. And so a lot of times for one force plate, you're going to use postural sway measurements, and we'll actually do that in the lab. For two force plates, it's most often set up to do gait analysis. So down here, there are some options here. There's Accu Gait and there's Accu Sway. If you have a single force plate installed, it needs to be under Accu Sway, and you see that's the case right here. If you're going to be installing both force plates in the same machine, then you would click Accu Gait. Okay, so right now this is correctly installed, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to uninstall it here just to show you how to do it. So if I hit Accu Sway, okay, now what I can see is that I've got, again, here's my serial number 0891 right here. Okay, here's the dimensions of my force plate, and then this is actually a calibration matrix, and what it literally does is it takes all of these different strain gauges, and there are 12 of them here, and then it multiplies it by this matrix, and out comes the force in the X direction, the Y direction, and the Z direction, and the moments in the X, Y, and Z direction. Okay, so what do I want to do with this? Well, what I could do is remove the force platform, and then I'll show you how to find it again. Okay, so let's say I remove it. Okay, so now I've got a whole lot of nothing. So for example, if you come in and you find that the force platform isn't working correctly, or if you find for some reason that it's become uninstalled, you might come up with this. And so what you're going to do is hit Add a Platform. Okay, are you sure you want to add a platform? Yes, I'm sure. Okay, so now what it's looking for is it's looking for calibration files, so something with a .acl, okay? And so what we can do is we can find that in the AMTI NetForce folder, which is located here in the C drive, okay? So when you see that each of the two force plates we have, serial number 891 and then serial number 780 is the other one, they each have ACL files. So I'm going to hit the calibration file for the force plate that I have selected. Okay, and then there it is. Now the only other thing that you need to adjust is the COM port. Okay, so right now it's set under COM 4. That's a good starting place. Often if for some reason you find that the force plate has been installed but for some reason it's not working, it's usually a COM port issue, and it's almost always COM 4, 5, or 6, but sometimes it just takes a little bit of trial and error. There is a pull down menu here. Okay, so I'm going to leave it under COM 4, and then I'm going to hit done, and then I'm going to hit done. Okay, now the next thing you want to know is your force plate actually working? Okay, so the best way to figure that out is to go to Startup and hit Hardware 0. Okay, now usually if it's working, okay, it'll say finish zeroing the platform. Sometimes it will say something like no echo byte received, or it'll give you an error message, or it'll just take a really long time. Usually that indicates a COM port issue. Okay, I do want to show you one other thing before we do this. Let me go back to setup. I'm going to go back to hardware installation. If you wanted to set up for 2 force plates, instead of hitting AccuSway, you'd go to AccuGate, and then you would add a platform that way, right? You would add your first platform, then you would hit add another platform, and you'd add your second platform, and then you would hit done. Okay? Now in this case here, and then if you wanted to flip back and look and see what your first platform was, you'd hit previous, or you could flip forward by hitting next. Okay, I'm actually not going to do that right now. I'm going to remove them both and just quit out of this. Okay, because I don't want to change it. Okay, so I'm going to hit done. Okay, so just to double check that I didn't mess anything up, I'm going to hit hardware 0 again. Okay, so that worked. Now, next thing you want to check are your data settings and where your folder is, where your data is going to be put. Okay, so data folder tells me where the data are going to be stored. At this point here, you can see I had a data folder set up for an earlier 3503 class. So what we'll do here is, and you can see there's a bunch of other ones here. So we'll actually create one, and we will call it, so we're going to call it 3503, whoops, C16, whoops, yeah, okay. And then we're going to open it. Okay, so now it's going to save everything in AMTI NetForce data 3503 C16. Okay, so that's where you're going to look for stuff when you find a file. Okay, good. So we hit OK. All right. So next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we're actually showing our data. Okay, so here's, right now it's showing force plate 1. And the other thing is that this AMTI NetForce program is set up to deal with clinical data. And so one of the things that it wants is it wants some information about patients. Okay, why is this important? Well, it's important because it's going to look for and give you an error if you don't have a patient. So if I hit subject, it says here unable to open AMTI patients.pat. Okay, let's try and create it. It's unable to open AMTI patients.tst. We'll create that too. Okay, and we'll add a sample record. Okay, so we're just going to call this test. Let's give it a height of like, I don't know, 60 inches. We'll give it a weight of, I don't know, 130 pounds. Okay, and we're going to hit add. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so then we're going to select this. Okay, now we have our subject name, which is test. Okay, it's actually not important for most labs that we do in this class that you actually enter anything, but it can be useful sometimes, and I will explain to you those situations when. Okay, so now the next thing we need to know is we need to check our acquisition settings. Okay, so I'm checking our settings, data acquisition. Okay, so right now we are set to have a 30-second data capture at 50 hertz. As you can see, 50 data seconds per second. And so we may want to adjust that depending on the type of data that we're interested in collecting. First of all, we may want a shorter data capture than 30 seconds. And the second thing is we may want a higher sampling rate, especially if we're doing some kind of high-speed activity like running or jumping. So we can capture up to 1200 hertz. For now, I'll set it to 60, and we'll set it for like 5 seconds worth of data. Oops. Okay. Yes, I know. Okay. And the thing is, it's going to make us restart this a bazillion times to work. So we hit OK. Okay. Then we hit exit. It's going to ask us, do we want to save exit? Do we want to save it? Yes. Half the time it asks us if we want to save it, and then it doesn't actually exit, but it seems to have this time. Okay. So here we are. We're back in. So now we're going to double check our data folder. Okay, it's still set to C16, so that's reassuring. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check our acquisition settings. So they're set to 5 seconds and 60 hertz, which is just how we left it. Let's make sure that it can find our force plates. Okay, so it found our force plates. And the next thing we can do now is we can just hit, we can select our patient here, so our subject. So here's our test. Select. Okay, so now we can hit start. Now when we hit start, usually, oh, there we go. Okay, usually we see something here, right? So this actually shows us the forces in all the different directions. And what'll happen is, I'm actually going to turn them all off for a moment. Okay, so let's just put on FZ. Okay, and you see you can move this up and down, and the other thing that I can do is I can check this